Hello. The Divine Code reading for April 5th, pages 605 and 606. We are in the chapter Laws of Returning Stolen Objects and Restitution for Theft. Topic number 21. This all applies. Now we've been discussing prior to this, we've been discussing what happens if the thief steals an object and then he sells it or he gives it to a third party. If he sells it or gives it to a third party, what is the ownership of the object, the status of ownership of the object? And it is a variety of factors as to what has to be done with it, or who is responsible for different parts of the value of the object. Has to do with the rest of whether or not the original owner gave up hope, if he still has hope of retrieving the object, or if he gave up hope, at what time did he give up hope? Did the value of the object go up or down? Was it damaged? Was it lost? There's a variety of factors, and that was all prior to this, with this point right here. Okay, topic 21. This all applies regarding the second person who bought or stole a stolen object from the first thief. But if someone finds a stolen item that a thief lost, or if he temporarily had a stolen item that the thief gave him to hold for safekeeping, and he knows the item is stolen. So in this case, if the person found a lost item, but he knows the item is stolen, he knows that somehow there's identification within it, or he saw in the news that this item was stolen, and he comes across it. Or either he comes across it as it was lost, or the thief asks him to hold it. But the person that's being asked to hold it knows that it's stolen. He is forbidden to return the item to the thief, since he'll be helping the thief to continue in his sin. So for the person finds it, or the person is asked to hold on to a stolen item. We're not to give it back to the thief, because it doesn't belong to the thief. And for us to give it back to the thief would become an accomplice to the thief's continuing stealing of the item. So we can't give it back to the thief. Instead, he should return it to the rightful owner. Now, he should. We don't have a requirement in Noahide law, which is mentioned in the next sentence. We don't have in the Jewish law. There's a requirement to return return lost items, and there's also a requirement to return a stolen item. And these laws exist now. In the Noahide law, there's a requirement to return, if the thief should return the stolen item, and that's where this entire chapter on returning or paying the value of a stolen item to the owner. This entire chapter is dealing with that topic, and it derives from the Jewish commandment to return a stolen item, which is a logical obligation upon the Noahide to do. The other Jewish commandment, which is returning lost property, it's a commandment for the Jews, and it's a pious, it's a reasonable thing for non-Jews to do. It's a pious thing for non-Jews to do. To take on, it's a proper thing to take on to return lost items. And in the Jewish law, this is discussed further. It's discussed in the literature, but certain items, such as if a person knows it's stolen, or if he knows who the owner is, even if it wasn't stolen, it was just lost. The wallet got dropped somewhere, and there's a driver's license in it. Obviously, return it to the owner. The person would not keep it himself. It would be improper to do that. Within the Jewish law, even if something like a pair of gloves gets lost, there's a requirement upon the Jew to take the pair of gloves home, put it in a safe place, put a sign up publicly publicizing that a pair of gloves were lost, and the Jew then has a requirement to hold on to those pair of gloves for basically an indefinite period of time, trying to find the owner to give them back to the owner. That extreme may or may not be taken on by a Noahide. The Noahide doesn't have to, but if it's an item that he knows is lost or he knows is stolen, then it's a logical thing to return it to the rightful owner and not to keep it for oneself or to just ignore it if it's obvious who the owner is. Instead, he should return it to the rightful owner. Nevertheless, if he returned it to the thief, the owner cannot demand from him the value of the stolen object. And that's for Shogunark 348.7. Even though Rima writes that the owner can demand payment from the one who returned the stolen object to the thief, since he caused the owner a loss. This is only because for a Jew there is an obligation to return the item to the owner, just like any lost object. For a Gentile, there is no Torah law to return a lost object. Therefore, in the Jewish law, because there's an obligation to return, there's a mitzvah, it's a commandment to return lost items, and that would include a stolen item that he came across. Then for a Jew not to do that and cause damage to the owner would be something where the owner can go to court and require his fellow to reimburse him for the loss. Because the non-Jew does not have such a commandment, then the non-Jew would not be financially liable for not returning the lost item. Since the person who safeguards a stolen item for the thief does not intend to receive it for himself. See Shulchan Aruch Koshen Mishpat 348.6 and Sefer Myriad Eliyam 348.14 and Bir Hagra there, topic 21. And there is no Torah law for a Gentile that a Gentile must return a lost object to its owner. So, because the person did not intend, now in the case of the earlier case from the last couple of days reading, where the owner, where the thief gives it to another person, he sells it or gives it to another person, then because the other person then takes on he doesn't take on ownership, but he takes on the kind of the role of a guardian. And at that point, he is responsible for partial of the loss that might go to the original owner for the original theft. The third, even if the third party inadvertently, he didn't know it was stolen, but he purchased something at the marketplace that turned out to be stolen, and if there's damage to it, he might, depending on the situation, he might be responsible for some of the damage. In the case of a person that holds on to it, it's not the same level of responsibility on his part. There is some responsibility, but not the same level. For the laws of a watchman in general, see chapter 7. So there's a lot. We're now basically in the laws of the guardian, which there's different types of guardian is someone who has possession of an item and what his responsibilities are. And there's different types of guardians, if he's paid or he's not paid, if he's borrowing it for use, if he's renting it. There's different types of guardians, and each one has their own levels of responsibility and their own levels of liability should something go wrong. And that's a larger area of discussion. And this, we're now in the laws of guardian when we're talking about this. The situation is someone who holds on to something, holds on to a stolen item. If a watchman was asked to guard a stolen object and he failed to do so as required, and he is obligated to pay for the loss he caused, it is obvious that the owner of the object may demand this payment from him, as long as the owner has not despaired, as explained in topic 20 above. So assuming, now we're talking about a string of events here, assuming that the owner has not despaired. I mean, the owner expects to get the item back. He's still looking for the item. He wants the item back. And the thief, for whatever reason, hands it to someone else to hold on to him, to hold on to the object. And something goes wrong with the object. The person that's holding on to it can be held responsible for reimbursing the owner for the loss that occurred while he was holding on to the item. And that would even count if the owner thought that the item belonged to the thief, or if he was holding on to it knowingly, or even if he found the item, the thief lost it and the third party picked it up. He has some level of responsibility for any damage that occurs to the item while it's in his possession. And that's discussed more in the section of guardians, which is in the upcoming volume yet to be published. But from what I understand, it's also similar to the Jewish law regarding guardians. If one stole and gave the object to another person as a gift, then if the owner despaired before the thief gave the gift, this is considered a change of jurisdiction. The thief need only to return the value of the stolen object to the owner, and the gift remaining in the possession of the one who received it. Remains in the possession of the one who received it. If the owner did not despair, then the object is still intact. It must be returned to the owner. Rambam Laws of Robbery, Chapter 2, Shulchan Aruch Choshen Mishpat, Chapter 362. So this is sort of the same situation, just a little different, as if the thief sold it to another person, or if he hands it over to another person to hold on to for a period of time. In this case, he's giving it to the other person as a gift. And the rules here are just about identical to the rules if he sold the person the stolen item for $10, or if he just gave it to him as a gift. In either case, if the owner despairs of receiving having the item returned to him, if the owner does no longer expect it to be returned, then the point where the owner no longer expects it to be returned, from that point on, it can be given to another person or sold to another person, and the other person owns it. And the thief has to reimburse the owner for the value of the item at the point that he despaired of receiving it back. If the owner did not despair, the owner still expects to get it back at the time of the gift or the time of the sale. Then the new person who either knowing it's a theft or not knowing it's a theft, the other person is responsible for returning the item. However, if one stole the item and his children inherited it, this is not considered a change of jurisdiction. And even if the owner despaired, the inheritors are obligated to return it if it is still intact. So the change of jurisdiction, in this case, it's part of the thief stole it. And now part of his estate, it's the estate of Mr. Thief, goes to the children. Now the children have the object. That that doesn't mean that the children received it as a gift or was sold to them. It means that the children now are in possession of the estate of the thief, which means that it did not change jurisdiction. It's still part of his estate. And I suppose if the children sold it to someone, then it would change jurisdiction at that point. But inheritance would not be considered a change of jurisdiction. The same, the way that selling it to another person would be considered a change of jurisdiction. I suppose if the thief sold it or gifted it to his children as a gift, that might be considered a change of jurisdiction. I'm not sure if it that might be considered a change of jurisdiction. I'm not sure if the divine code goes into that possibility, but I'm sure it's the same as, well, no, because Jewish law has different aspects of inheritance, so it may or may not apply in that case. But definitely, if it's part of an inheritance, it would still be owed to the thief. It didn't change jurisdiction. If it changed and it's still, if it is still intact, if it changed, and by that I assume it changed its a name. That means it changed its essence. It used to be a pile of bricks, and now it's they made an oven, a brick oven out of it, or something. So now it's a different thing. If it changed and it's still in their jurisdiction, they must pay the value to the victim of the theft, even if he despaired. If the object was lost, they are exempt from making reimbursement. So this is a curious in-between zone. The inheritors are responsible to a certain extent if they still have the object. If they lost the object, if the original thief lost the object, he's still responsible to pay the value of the object. If the inheritors still have the object, but it's changed, if they still have the object, they have to return the object. If they took the object, they changed it into something else. So it's no longer the same essence, and that was described earlier in this chapter. Then they have to pay the value of the original item because it wasn't the father's to give to their children to begin with, and therefore they have to reimburse for what they have. If they lost it, then they're exempt. So in that regard, they don't have the same level. This is really in the laws of guardianship. A lot of this entire chapter could be seen as a subchapter of the laws of guardianship. It's different within rabbinic law because there's different laws involved. There's different mitzvahs within the Jewish law. In the non-Jewish law, we have the laws of courts and the laws of theft, and the returning of a stolen object is part of the laws of theft, and all these other. The original thief to return the stolen object would be the laws of theft, but a lot of this other area of damages going to courts. So where in the Jewish law, this is all under the laws of theft. In the non-Jewish law, this might be more under the laws of guardianship, would be my suggestion. But it's designed in this area. But realistically, a lot of this stuff would be understood under the laws of guardianship. If the inheritors destroyed the stolen item, such as food that was eaten or firewood that was burned, whether during the life of the father, the thief, or after his death, then if they destroyed it before the owner despaired, they're obligated to reimburse the owner, and if they destroyed it afterwards, they are exempt. So, yeah, again, we're in a quasi zone here regarding inheritance. If the people It depends upon when it was lost, or when it's, well, I guess if it's lost, it doesn't depend. But if it's consumed, it's used by the people, by the inheritors, then if the original owner was expecting it back, then they have to pay for the value of whatever they used. Destroyed means it was used for some purpose, like being eaten or being used as fuel or something like that. So it's no longer returnable, and that would be similar to using it to make something. So it's no longer the same essence. So it depends on whether or not the owner expected it back. If he did not expect it back, then they are exempt, which would seem to imply that they don't have. It would be like a lost item, that they don't not expected to give it back. Shokanor Kosha Mishpat 361.7. See there in Rambam, Laws of Theft, Chapter 5, regarding the obligation of the orphans to pay the debts of their father. It appears that an exemption, a Gentile is exempt in this regard. And when it's it is also clear that if a Gentile is bound by the law, if the father left property for the children, the property is under lien to any debts that he had prior to their death. So there's a lien on the stolen item. And the question is whether or not they're required to pay back the lien if the item is no longer there. And that's what we're looking at here. Thank you.